Running solo today. All right, today we have Teal Label. It's from Modest Brewing Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's a West Coast IPA. It's pretty good. It's a little different. I was just up in Minnesota this last weekend. Meant to shoot a podcast with my buddy up there. And, well, we never got around to it because we were just having too much fun. So, but he tried this beer while we were up there. I don't know if it's one he has had before or not, but he loves trying all these different beers and knows more than I do. It's a West Coast IPA with pale ale malt, dry hopped with hand-selected Citra, Simcoe, Strata, and Columbus Cryo. Huh. Fancy. 6.3%. That's the can. If anybody's wondering, I don't know if that's going to be in focus or not, but yeah, that's pretty good. It's not one of my favorite flavors. I mean, it's not bad. It's just different. I'm still trying to figure out all the different types of flavors with beers, and obviously I really like the hazy ones. Definitely the stuff that's like very citrusy type stuff. I mean, it's probably kind of fruity, I guess. So I don't know what that says about me, but that's stuff I enjoy so far. That Zipline Brewing Dang IPA, I actually was drinking some of that earlier. I might even have a little left. Yeah, I do have a little bit left. This one is still probably my favorite one I've tried so far. This one and the Fairy Nectar from Cross Strain. Both very good. But now that one's gone. So we'll finish off this Teal Label. But all right, well, welcome back to Pins and Crosshairs, episode 8. Like I said, I was supposed to shoot a podcast with my buddy up in Minnesota last weekend. I failed to do that. Definitely on me on that one. We were just having a good time. Whenever I get together with my buddy Luke up in Minnesota, we go hard and we have a lot of fun. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to see him actually in about a month. We're actually going to St. George, Utah for a golf trip. If you've never been to St. George, Utah at all, it's a beautiful city, very well kept, very nice, great restaurants, just great people, just a great area to be in. Right, really close to Zion National Park for anybody that's into national parks. It's supposed to be apparently one of the prettiest ones. I haven't been there yet. We didn't go last year. Last year was kind of a shorter trip, so we golfed 4 days, I think, or 3 days. I don't remember. Last year we flew into Vegas, and then rented a car, drove 2 hours to St. George. So the first day we couldn't golf, and then I think we golfed 3 days in a row after that, and then had to drive back to Vegas that Friday night because we had to catch our flight early Saturday morning. So this year we're flying straight into St. George. Ended up finding flights that were pretty much the same price. So now we're going to have that an extra day, and we got a few more guys going this year. If you're a golfer and you've never done a golf trip like that, I would highly encourage it. It is an absolute blast. So looking forward to that, and I plan on bringing a kind of a basic podcast setup for down there to do with him, and probably do with him and my buddy David. So that one won't really be too much hunting related. But like I said, I want this to be hunting and outdoors too. It's not just going to be all hunting. I mean, today that's what I'm going to be talking about, but I want to do stuff with like the power sports and stuff. I don't know enough about that, but I have friends that do. I've got some family that do. So I want to have some people on to talk about that more. Luke is really into that. He's not a hunter. He is a fisherman. He lives up in Minnesota, obviously, so good place to be. We actually went out so my wife and I and our kids went up there. We go up there a few times a year. They live just outside of Minneapolis, and went up there. And the second we got there, Luke was getting his dirt bike loaded up, and he just got a 4-wheeler. And so we went out to this lake close by, and Luke's a really good rider on his dirt bike. So he's got studded tires on it for the ice. So we went out there, and I took my camera and my drone and got some footage of him. He was just flying around. It was just crazy watching him just flying around on this ice, just ripping around. It was so much fun. Got some cool shots with the drone and with the camera, and I just putzed around on the 4-wheeler. So, but it was a lot of fun. So definitely try and do some more of that. He went with a group of people. They go riding the river. They all get on like their side-by-sides and four-wheelers when the river's frozen enough, and they go ride the rivers and stuff. It's super cool. Nothing I've ever done, but another cool thing to look into that I'd like to do at some point in the future. Minnesota's a fun place to be, so even though it does get cold, I know that's the biggest complaint, but I tell you what, there's a lot to do up there in the wintertime. Even though it is cold, there's so many things going on. It's a truly fun place to be. So, but today we're going to be talking about essentially deer population. I'll kind of dive into it. I've been doing a bunch of research for this one. Obviously, didn't have anybody to podcast with this week. I could have done it again with my wife, but that'd be kind of pointless on this one just because she's not going to have a clue about deer population or any of that aspect of it. I'm kind of looking through like historically the deer population. Started out looking at Nebraska, just kind of seeing where we were at. And then after that, kind of dove into other states, especially surrounding states. I didn't look at every single state that's, got deer, but I tried to find states that were in our area, just kind of looking to see where Nebraska compares to that and kind of seeing what the states do differently and just seeing their patterns. So I looked up a lot of numbers on that. So I'm going to go over all the different numbers from harvest and just deer population from a bunch of states, just hopefully to give you guys an idea of kind of where every state stands, I guess, not just Nebraska, but, if you are from a different state that, I've got, I think 6 or 7 of the states here that I'm going to go over. So if you're from one of those states and you don't know what your population or harvest is like every year, hopefully this will help you out. So yeah, I kind of started nerding out over it, and we'll dive into it here in a second. It's it's one of those things I feel like it's every deer hunter, not every, but most deer hunters, everybody's always going to talk about the population, and whether they're seeing deer, whether they're not seeing deer, whether they're seeing big deer, whether they're only seeing little deer, whether they're not seeing any bucks at all, only seeing does. So it's one of those topics that's always talked about, and everybody always seems to have the best solution if, the numbers are down, or they feel like they're down. Everybody's going to have their idea and their solution that this will fix the problem. We know what's best. And honestly, to be fair, none of us probably really know. That's why we have game and parks. Now, you could say that maybe your game and parks doesn't do a great job of it. Every state's going to be different. I do think some states focus more on, I know they try and focus on every type of animal, but I think there's certain states that probably focus on, specific animals more. Some might be deer, some might be pheasant, could be waterfowl. Waterfowl might be different. I don't know. I'm not a huge into the waterfowl. I know there's a lot of federal stuff with waterfowl, so I don't know all the details of that. I'll have to have somebody on a waterfowl specialist for that to dive into that because I don't know enough. But talking about deer, I have ideas of what I think would be nice in the state of Nebraska. I'm not going to say that my ideas are right because I could very well be wrong. I know that they do a lot of research and a lot of studies and stuff in our state, and they try and work as best they can to try and make everybody happy and also keep the population good, but also not too many. So, we don't know. A lot of it's going to be based on habitat, I think, personally. I think habitat makes a huge difference. If your state has a lot more habitat for deer, I think you're going to have more deer. I think that's just the way it is. Predators could be a big issue. I think that they might be an issue in Nebraska at times. But again, I don't know all those details, and I'm not going to cover all of that. I am going to give my opinion on what I think would be nice to see, but again, my opinion really doesn't matter, and I'm not saying that I'm right or I'm wrong. Just a lot of it, I am just going off of what I've seen specifically with some of the research I did, because I've read a lot of articles and looked at a lot of stuff of what all these states are doing and different states do and seeing the data from it. And so I kind of want to talk about that. So that way, maybe I have a little bit of backing behind what I'm talking about. But again, it's still just my opinion. So don't crucify me if you think I'm wrong. So, all right, well, let's dive in. So I picked out these states, and I'm actually going to do Nebraska last. So, yeah, you either got to skip ahead or you can listen to me talk about every state. Hopefully you like it, but if you don't, I get it. I'll try and put a chapter in so that way you know where Nebraska's at if you're a Nebraska listener. I started with Iowa. So I'm going to cover just a few different numbers here, and I found this website. It's called deerfriendly.com. Don't know if anybody's seen it before or not. They basically pull all these numbers and all these articles from like the Iowa Game and Parks website. Basically, it's like it's all their stuff. Like, these people aren't just typing this stuff, making it up. It's all the numbers and articles from each state. Like, these are from the actual state people that are putting these numbers out. So they're not fake numbers. These are just what the states are saying. So, but this website has all this information. It's really cool. So if you've never heard of deerfriendly.com, and you want to look it up just to see how your state is or other states are, there's a ton of information and a ton of history. It's actually really cool. So that's where I ended up getting most of this when I started bouncing around trying to figure that out. But so Iowa deer population. Some of these numbers are going to be different in each state because they don't always have the most up-to-date numbers. On some of the states, they don't. And I don't know if that's because some of the states don't put out these numbers. But Iowa deer population, theirs starts with, for 2023, the state estimates about 450,000 deer in the state before hunting season in 2023. Post-hunt, they expect about 350,000. So Iowa, when I scrolled down and looked at their chart, they kill at least 100,000 deer a year. So their highest year from what they show in their data, back in 2006, they killed over 175,000 deer that year. It doesn't say what the population was in that year, so it may be higher. But on average, looking at this chart, and I'll try and see if I can link some of these charts. But like I said, go to deerfriendly.com and just go to each state and you can find all these. Their highest year, though, was like 176 to 180,000, it looks like, that they killed in 1 year. On average, for the last, it looks like since 2013, they've been pretty much right around that 100 to 110,000 mark. They kill every single year. So they're killing just over 100,000 a year in Iowa. And then when I go back and look at their population, so they said 2023, they had 450,000 deer. In 2021, they had 478,000 deer, to slightly increasing in 2022. So they had a little bit more than 478,000 in 2022 and 2023. In 2020, they had 445,000 deer. In 2019, 460,000. And in 2018, 475,000. So they're killing on average 100 to 110,000 deer a year in Iowa. And every year they are still back up to that 450 to 475,000 deer. You would think, at least I personally thought, that there was way more deer in Iowa than 450,000 deer, especially when they're killing 100,000 deer a year. I was shocked when I saw that number, to be honest. I really thought it was going to be higher than 450,000. And a lot of that is just because I feel like they do have better habitat over there for deer. But there's also areas that are kind of like Nebraska where it's just a lot of ag, so I do get it. But I did think it was going to be more deer. So what impresses me, though, is the fact that they kill 100,000 deer a year, and every year they bounce right back to that same number of getting back up to that 450 to 475. That's really impressive. So whatever they're doing over there, and that's without a gun season, like without a rifle season. Iowa doesn't do firearm, like they don't do rifle. They have their shotgun and muzzleloader. Otherwise, it's bow. So it's real impressive to see those numbers and to see that they bounce back every year. And they they've actually had some EHD outbreaks in the last couple of years. There's actually some parts in this article that talk about it. But still, I mean, their population peaked in 2006. It says it was 650,000, and that was back when the chart showed that they killed like 175,000 or 180,000 deer. But their population is still staying stable every year at that 450 to 475, which is impressive. Killing that many deer every year, and it's still bouncing back. So I don't know what they're doing with that. I don't know if that is predator control over there. I don't know if it's just because they do have a better habitat for deer. There's plenty of articles here you could read to see maybe some of the stuff that they do. I wasn't able to dive into all of it too much, but that's impressive. And Iowa obviously is known for having big deer. So hats off to you, Iowa. That's about the one thing I like about you guys. You got good deer. Sorry, I'm a Nebraska diehard. But all right, so let's move on to Kansas. Kansas deer population, about 700,000 deer in 2024. And it was reported that in 2023, they had 699,000 deer. So a lot of deer in Kansas. I wasn't surprised by that, but when I first was looking this stuff up, I looked up Iowa after I looked up Nebraska, and I was like, okay, well, let's look up Kansas. And the fact that Kansas has that many more deer than Iowa, I was actually shocked. I know Kansas does have a lot of deer, and they have big deer. They're another great whitetail state, but I didn't expect them to be that much more than Iowa. So it looks like, for the most part, they always stay around that 650 to 700,000 is what it's showing pretty much all these past 8 years. It looks like they're all in that same area. And they also have mule deer listed because they do have some mule deer. Their mule deer population definitely fluctuates a little bit more probably than they would prefer. They estimated in 2024 that they had 36,000 mule deer. Or no, that was in 2023, excuse me. In 2022, they had 51,000. And in 2021, they had 41,000. So they're fluctuating between that 35 to 50,000 mule deer, which isn't a high number, but that's still a good number. I don't know how many people mule deer hunt in Kansas. If anybody does, let me know. I'd just be curious to know. I'm assuming it's in the western part of the state. Where I hunt is not far from Kansas, and we do have mule deer. So I'm assuming it's kind of in that same, probably that northwest part of the state, Kansas. But so yeah, I mean, they got mule deer too, and I don't know what it's like to draw, if you have to draw a mule deer tag there. I don't know how that all works, obviously, but they obviously got plenty of whitetail. Going down to the harvest. Let's see what we got here. I think there's a chart. Yeah. Okay. So Kansas deer harvest in, looks like the year 2000 was their highest deer harvest. And that was about 110,000 deer, it looks like. It's a chart, so I'm going off of it, but that's pretty close. Probably 110 to 115. And then you get in the more recent years, like the last 5 years. Actually, they only go to 2020 on this chart, so I actually don't even know the last 5 years. But basically, for the most part, if you averaged out the last 20 years on here, or the 20 from 2000 to 2020, they're averaging out around right about 90, probably 85 to 90,000 deer killed every year in Kansas. So, I mean, they're killing almost as much as Iowa, and their population is quite a bit more than Iowa. I mean, 700,000 pretty consistently in the last few years. I wish these had the harvest numbers for the last few years, but they don't have them. But, I mean, that's a lot of deer. 700,000 deer to keep that around pretty much all year round, or every year, year after year, and they're still killing about 100,000, 90,000, something like that. Yeah. Kansas still has plenty of deer. I don't know what they do down there either. I know they got some good habitat down there too, but it all depends on the area. But Kansas obviously is known as one of the good whitetail states as well. So a lot of good deer get killed there. So they've got something figured out. Not too much more about Kansas. So we're going to move on to the next state. Illinois. All right, another big buck state. Obviously, there's those. I don't remember what counties they are, but there's a couple counties in Illinois that obviously they produce giants all the time. Kind of like some of those same couple counties in Iowa. Same thing. They just produce a lot of big deer. This one, kind of the same thing. They don't have all the numbers from the most recent years on this site, but in 2021, they had about 640,000 deer, which was down 50,000 from 2020, which was 690,000. A nearly stable population from 2013 to 2021 of around 640 to 690,000 deer. That was following a large decline after an EHD outbreak in 2012, when the population was estimated to be 700 to 750,000. And the peak population was around 2008, when the herd was estimated 800,000 to 1 million. But right now they're sitting, for the most part, from what it looks like, around that 650 to 700,000 mark. That huge EHD outbreak that year in 2012 also pounded Nebraska too. I'll talk about that when I get to it, but we had that same thing that year. So about 650,000 deer in the state of Illinois every year. Let's see what they have for harvest numbers. So same, like I said, they only have up to 2020 on this one as well. But the average from 2011 to 2020, the average harvest of every season looks to be right at about 160,000 would probably be the average. From 2013 to 2020, the average is about 150. A lot of years in the upper 140s, some 150s, and a 160. 2011, 2012 was their highest years on here, which was 181,000 harvests and 180,000. And then they had that EHD outbreak that they said, and that was when it dropped down to 148,000. So 30,000 less harvests, but still a good year. So they're killing a lot of deer in Illinois, but they also have a good population. I mean, sitting around that 700,000, that's pretty good. I mean, again, I think they have some really good habitat in Illinois. I don't really know much what else to say about that. If anybody has anything to say about, why they have that many deer, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Illinois, obviously, if you drive through there, there's some areas you're just like, man, there's got to be some big deer here. Obviously not in Chicago though, because Chicago sucks. But, I don't have too much more to say about Illinois. I don't have much experience with Illinois. Being in Nebraska, I've driven through Illinois a couple times, but I'm never really there to do anything. But obviously I do know there's a good handful of big hunters that do hunt Illinois quite a bit, or live there. Some of them have farms there. Some live there. Obviously, there's quite a few of them out there. But yeah, if you guys have any more opinions or information on Illinois, let me know. Put them in a comment or something. All right, let's move on to South Dakota. South Dakota, right above Nebraska. All right, what year is this? 2022, there was an estimate of 377,000 whitetails and 90,000 mule deer. Excuse me, no, that's not correct. It doesn't say what year this is. It just says an estimated preseason deer population of 440,000 with a state estimate of 90,000 mule deer and 350,000 whitetails. I'm assuming that's 2023 because then it goes to the next one, which says 2022. And that was 377. It's about the same. So South Dakota's sitting, it looks like their fluctuation on here looks like it goes pretty much around the 440,000 to 480,000 deer each year. It says in 2016, they had about 540,000, but they had a really harsh winter and a drought and an EHD outbreak that year. So that decreased some of their numbers. So they were up around the 540,000, dropped down to the mid to upper 400s, and that's kind of where they're sitting right now. That's a pretty decent mule deer population, though. I mean, 90,000, 80,000, 87,000. Like, that's good numbers for mule deer. I've never hunted in South Dakota. Something I'd like to do at some point, but they got a pretty good population there. About like Iowa. Obviously, Iowa doesn't have mule deer, but same number of deer. Let's look at their chart here for the harvest. In 2011, that was their peak harvest, and they killed a total of 95,000 deer. It looks like it was about 80,000, maybe, yeah, roughly around 80,000 or 75,000 whitetail and just over 10,000 in mule deer. Go to 2021, which is the last year that shows. They had total harvest of 55,000 deer. And so obviously they had that EHD outbreak they talked about. I don't remember what year it said that was. They were saying 2017 was the drought in EHD. It looks like on their chart here, about 2015, they had it. So they had a steady decline from 2011 to 2015. In 2011 is when they killed 95,000 deer total. 2012, it was about 85,000. Or 2011. 2012, it was 70,000. 2013, 55,000. 2014, it was all the way down to under 50,000 for total harvest. So that's a huge drop in a 5-year span from 95 to 45. And that's a consistent like 10,000 every year it went down. And then it jumped back up to just over 50,000 and stayed there, bumped up to 60 in 2020. And then at 2021, back down to 55. So they're on this chart. Obviously, I don't know what the last few years are like, but they're pretty much now killing about 50 to 60,000 a year, and they're still sitting around that 450,000 deer mark. So a lot less than Iowa and Kansas. Same number of deer as Iowa, but they're killing a lot less. They're killing half the amount that Iowa is. So Iowa was killing 100,000 deer a year with a 450,000 population. South Dakota is at 450,000 roughly, and they're killing about 50,000 a year. So it's a lot less deer to kill, and it's not really, population is not bouncing back. I'd be curious to know why that is. Interesting. Obviously, South Dakota is very well known as a pheasant state. So I know they put a lot of time and money into their pheasant and their habitat for pheasant. I don't know how that affects deer, and I don't know if that affects the way they do things up there at all. But yeah, that's interesting. That was a huge drop in a 5-year span. I wonder if it says what the population was at that time, because that's what I'd be curious to know. Let me see if I can find that real quick. So 2016, they estimated they had 540,000 deer. So they had about 100,000 more than they did in like 2020. I don't know if there's any more details here. Let's see if I can find some. So it looks like when that decline started in the harvest, they had some really harsh winters. So populations peaked in 2009. An estimate of 215,000 they had a whitetail population estimate of 215,000 in 2009, which is still a little low. That's weird. I don't know if their numbers are right here, but they're saying they had really harsh winters in 2008, 2009, 2010, and a drought in 2012. And that was when their population declined. In 2013, when the deer kill totaled 25,000 whitetail and 23,000, that was 23,000 white-tailed bucks and 23,000 white-tailed does and only 4,000 mule deer bucks. Yeah, it decreased significantly. A 60% success rate was a target for much of the state in 2017. All right, well, we're going to move on from that. Otherwise, I'm going to sit here and stare and read all this stuff even more. But South Dakota, not bad. I would maybe expect more deer to be honest, but yeah. All right, let's move on to Missouri. Missouri deer population. Before I say it, I want to know what all your guesses are. So let me know how many deer you guys think are in the state of Missouri. Throw it in a comment, just because this one actually blew my mind after seeing some of the other states. Missouri deer population, whitetail deer in 2021, 2022, and 2023 is estimated about 1.4 million whitetail deer. Big number. I know Missouri has a lot of deer, but I didn't expect it to be that big, especially after seeing like Iowa and Kansas. Yeah, I mean, even going back to 2019 and 2018, it still was saying 1.4 million. And before that, so 2015 through 2017 was 1.2 million. So, I mean, they got a lot of deer in Missouri. I need to go hunt there, apparently. I did go down to Missouri with my buddy Ben, who's on the podcast. And we did see a good amount of deer, and we weren't even quite there at the perfect time. Like it was kind of the pre-rut, kind of, I guess most people would call it the lockdown, if it is a thing or whatever. But so we weren't there like prime rut, but he actually ended up going back late season and killing one. So that was cool. I wasn't able to go on that trip, but let's see what they have for total deer harvest. So their chart sucks. But from what it looks like, I mean, it's because it has a chart that shows the deer population, the simulated deer population. And their chart looks like it only goes to probably 2016 here. But on average, they're killing from 2006 on. It's like an average of just over 200,000 deer a year. So that's a lot. It's a lot more than any of the other states we've covered so far. But they also have 1.4 million deer. So, I mean, that's awesome. That's a lot. But yeah, it's like for the most part, it's anywhere from, it might even be 200 to 300,000. It looks like is where it could be, like up and down a little bit. But when you got 1.4 million deer, that's a lot of deer. So it makes sense. But the one thing I will say is it's consistent, even though they're killing that many deer every year. Every year it's showing they got 1.4 million deer. So they must be doing something right. They do have some really nice habitat down there for deer. It was a really cool area, the place we hunted. We hunted by, I think it was by Maryville is where we were at in that area. Lots of sweet farms down there. We went through an outfitter. I was just filming for Ben, but went through an outfitter down there, and super cool guy. And he just had a bunch of farms that he leased. And they were all sweet spots. And we saw a good amount of deer, but obviously we just didn't get on any big ones at that point. But yeah, so I don't have a whole lot of other details. I mean, there's a ton here you can keep reading and stuff. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not going to do that while we're on the podcast here. But so far, Missouri, they got a lot of deer and they kill a lot of deer. So I didn't even cover one of the states that I know kills like the most deer every year. I mean, I think Michigan and Wisconsin might be the ones that kill the most every year, but I could be wrong, but I feel like I've heard that before. I tried Minnesota because I was curious. Kind of always wanted to live up in Minnesota, so I was curious to see what they have up there. Minnesota in 2023, about 950,000 deer in Minnesota. It's a lot of deer. I mean, I do always see a lot of deer while I'm up there, but I didn't realize it was that much. But it is a big state, and they do have a ton of timber. I don't know if that is why, but looks like they consistently stay around that 920 to 960,000. It looks like. Looks like some of their lowest years back in 2014 and 2015 was 800 and 850,000. And then they were up to 1 million in 2016, 2017. So a lot of deer. A lot of deer in Minnesota. Their harvest numbers. Looks like the chart on here only goes to 2016. That's what they have on here. But in 2004, it looks like roughly, they killed almost 300,000 deer. And then it started to go down, actually. Pretty much from then on to all the way to 2014, it dropped all the way down to about 150,000. So they dropped almost 150,000 deer. It was a progression every year, pretty much. They would kind of go up a little bit, then it'd go down, and then go way down, then kind of go up a little bit, then down, then bounce back up to around 175,000 deer harvested in 2016. I don't have any more of the more recent years, but to be at, roughly 850,000 deer and they're harvesting about 150,000, I mean, that's a lot. I honestly had no idea with Minnesota what their numbers were. There was actually a good article I read some on here. I don't remember where I was at in it because it was actually pretty interesting what it was called. I found it on here. It was just called White-tailed Deer in Minnesota, and it was like their deer management plan advisory committee in 2016. Actually had some really interesting info because it talked about how many deer get killed by predators in their state. And they said most of it was bear and coyote, I think. They said in it that only 5% of the fawns were killed by wolves. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know how many wolves they have up Minnesota, up north. I don't know if there is anybody from Minnesota that would have some info on that. Let me know, because I would be curious to know if that is accurate or if you guys think that's off and they're just trying to say that so that way they don't have to kill wolves. I don't know. But I don't know. They might have a wolf season too. I don't know if Minnesota has one. Yeah, where was that at? I want to find that. They also talked about the deer getting hit by cars because they said, like, what was it? They estimated they had like 2,096 collisions reported to the Minnesota Department of Public Safety with deer. But then when they went down to State Farm insurance claims in that same year, it was like 37,000 insurance claims from State Farm on deer hit by cars. So somebody's wrong, somebody's right. I don't know. But, so I mean, losing 37,000 deer to cars, that's a lot. But I mean, if you have that many deer, I do believe it. So that was an interesting thing I saw when I was reading this article. All right, let's check out Indiana. Indiana was an interesting one I wanted to talk about. So Indiana reported a state estimate of 700,000 deer in 2024. 2020 was 680,000. About the same in 2017. 2015, 730. 2014, 700,000. So it's all staying right around the 700 to 780. The one thing I thought was interesting about Indiana, let's look at their harvest numbers first. They go all the way to 2020 here. And for the most part, since 2005, it looks like, they're averaging pretty much about 120,000 deer killed a year. Most recent being 2020, it was right at that 120,000. They've had some ups for a few years, and then it kind of went down, then it bounced back. But for the most part, 120,000 deer a year in Indiana are harvested, and they're, from what it's showing here, their populations always staying between, for the most part, 700 to 750,000, somewhere in that area, roughly. Looks like. So, I mean, it's like similar to Kansas, about the same numbers. Kansas had 700,000 deer roughly, and they were killing about 100 to 150,000. I think it might have been. I can't remember what it said for sure, but same type of thing though. The one thing that, and I heard about this a few years ago. Actually, it may have just been a year or two, but I didn't realize Indiana went to a $1 state. And they did that back in 2002. And I'll have to see if I can find, I've got the article up here that talks about it. The one thing I thought was interesting was when they had you could shoot $2, it was like 65 Boone and Crockett entries from like 1985 to like 2002. And then from 2002 until now, they've had over 600 Boone and Crockett entries. So 20-year span, essentially, they had 65 Boone and Crockett entries. Now, not everybody probably enters their Boone and Crockett bucks in the record books. So, to be fair, not everyone's in there. But they went from 65 over like a 20-year span to over 600 in a 20-year span. Like, that's a significant change. And that was after they instated the $1 rule. And what I was reading in this article, it was the guy who was kind of the one that spearheaded the whole $1 rule. His last name was Caudell, Caudell. I don't remember if it says his first name here anywhere. Where is it at? Joe Caudell. I think that's how you say it. Caudell, I would assume. But I don't know. He's a state deer biologist. But so what he basically said was 56% of the bucks harvested in Indiana prior to 2002 were yearlings. So over half the bucks that were getting killed in the state of Indiana for 20 years, essentially, and probably even before that, were yearling bucks. And apparently there was a lot of people complaining, and I don't know, everybody's got their own opinions on why they hunt or whatever. Like, it's fine, but people were complaining that they didn't have bigger bucks. They felt like there should be bigger bucks in the state. So this guy was the one that started this whole, like, all right, well, we're going to need somehow, I think it says he worked with lawmakers and began hearing from voters. I don't know. It might be a different part. Anyway, they instated a $1 rule in Indiana. And what he said was everybody, 50%, 56% are killing yearlings. So we're not getting the age structure that we need to sustain our habitat and to get big bucks. Because if everybody's killing all these yearlings, you're killing all these deer before they are even ready to breed does. And so, God, this cord is pissing me off. What did he say here? Oh, sorry, I was off on this, on the BNC entries. From 1980 to 2002, it was just over 200 entries into the Boone and Crockett. From 2003 to 2020, it was almost 700. So still significantly more. But yeah, so they instated the $1 rule because what they found with probably doing all their surveys and stuff, and I mean, talking to people, was most of the hunters in Indiana would, I don't mean most, I'm not calling out Indiana hunters, don't get me wrong, I'm not doing that, but they would shoot the first young buck that they saw because they had 2 tags. So they would shoot their first young buck for meat, and then they would wait and hold out for a bigger buck for their second tag. So they still were trying to kill a bigger buck, but in the process, they were killing the young ones. So when they reinstated the $1 rule, people were a lot pickier on the buck they shot. They weren't shooting the yearling bucks anymore. They were waiting for a bigger buck. And their population started going up significantly. So at one point, they had tons of people complaining because they were hitting too many deer with cars. So at that point, then they increased the amount of tags you could buy for does and encouraged you to shoot does. And so that was what they did to help bring the population back down because there were so many deer. And apparently they said it worked. And they said that really they were really trying to change the age structure for the herd, which is why they went to the one buck rule. And then when the population would get too high, they would shoot more does. So, and because they were saying basically before that, people just didn't shoot does. They would shoot the little bucks instead of shooting the does. So they were trying to encourage people to shoot more does, let the young bucks live. And in the end, it worked out, and they ended up having a ton more big bucks. So I think that's pretty cool and some pretty good data and research, I guess, on that it actually worked. Not saying every state should do that, but for Indiana, it made a big difference. They actually have this one guy, if anybody knows who he is. I mean, some people might know because if you're into deer hunting, but this guy's name was Dustin Huff, and he killed, I remember seeing this picture circulate the internet a few years ago. I don't remember what year this was, but I remember seeing it. And he shot this 211 4/8 typical whitetail, which at that time, I don't know if it's changed or not, but that was the second biggest typical whitetail ever. And it's a giant. It's just a huge 5x5. Massive. But, I mean, and that was only a few years ago, if I remember correctly. And that's one of those deer that made it longer because, I suppose, because they had the one buck rule and you had to be a little pickier. But, so, I mean, Indiana obviously did something right there. I'll be curious to know if they ever go back to a 2-buck state. I mean, maybe, I'm sure if they get to the point where the population is too out of control, but I don't know. It is just interesting. Obviously being in Nebraska, we're a 2-buck state here. I mean, I'm curious to know how many people actually kill 2 bucks every year in Nebraska. I have one buddy, Ben, that I hunt with, and he's killed 2 bucks every year for the past 3 or 4 years until this year. He only killed 1. All right, moving on to Nebraska. So I was just curious because I actually have been tracking every year. I do look at the harvest data that they put out every year just because I'm always curious. And I've been actually doing that for quite a while, like probably 15 to 20 years. And I've never paid close enough attention to what it means, but they used to put it out in the paper and stuff. So it was always cool to see every year, be like, I wonder how many deer got killed this year. And most of the time, the one that they were always putting out was just the firearm because I think it's probably 80 to 90% of our deer get killed during rifle season. So, Nebraska, it looks like in 2024. Actually, yeah, these was actually kind of some of the weird ones. It was hard to find some of the numbers. An estimated population of 320,000 deer in 2019. And then it said numbers increasing in 2020, but down in 2022. And I could not find even on the website where I went to Nebraska's website to try and I was searching, trying to find the population numbers because the last 2 years, everybody is like, there's no deer. Like, we're not seeing deer. Like, we don't understand where they are. Like, what's happening. And I could not find any population numbers for 2023 or 2024. I can't even find them. Looks like from after 2019, which I thought is odd. Like, I feel like they should be telling us how many deer we have in the state. Or are they too scared to tell us how many deer are in the state because it's so low? Because that's the way it feels right now in Nebraska. It feels like the population is bad, really bad. I mean, certain areas are going to be better than others, but I mean, it's been rough, at least for me and for a lot of other people that have been, I mean, on some of these pages I'm on, some of these people are talking about how, in their areas, and especially some of them are on good river property and stuff. They're like, we used to see, 80 to 100 deer out in the field in the evenings feeding. Like, now we're lucky if we see 5. And it's like, that's pretty insane. So let's go back and look at the numbers that do give us. An estimated population of 320,000 deer in 2019. So they're saying in 2019 we had 320,000 deer in Nebraska. And then it said numbers increasing in 2020, but down in 2022. The mule deer population in 2023 was estimated by the state at about 70,000, which was down from 135,000 in 2019. There was about 340,000 deer in 2018, 340,000 in 2017, 315,000 in 2016. So for the most part, it looks like Nebraska, from the numbers they're giving me from 2016 to 2020, is all in that 315 to 340,000 deer is what it's saying. I had mentioned earlier, we had that really bad EHD year in 2012. I remember that year. I actually remember hearing some farmers talking to some farmers when we were out hunting that year, and they were saying how they'd find like 70 dead deer in their like cornfields when they were picking their corn. Just tons of dead deer just in their cornfields and stuff. It's crazy. Yeah, they were just saying, like, this one farmer's like, yeah, I had 30 of them. One farmer's like, I had 70 of them. The other one's like, I had 20. It's just like, there were so many. It was crazy. It hit the majority of the state. It was pretty wild. We usually have pockets of EHD every year. We even had it last year. We lost one of our best bucks last year to EHD. I found it in August. And I found some more dead doe heads later too that year in the same area that I'm assuming were EHD. And yeah, so it happens everywhere. But some years are obviously worse than others. But so if we're averaging around 320 to 350,000 deer every year in Nebraska. So right before that EHD year, we had peaked at our highest harvest, which was 88,000 in 2010, 86,000 in 2011. And then it went to 60,000 in 2012. So it dropped over 20,000. And then in 2013, it was down to 48,000 was the total harvest. And then going from there, it bounced back a little bit to 52, then 58,000, 58, stayed at around 60,000. So it had leveled out at the upper 50s to 60,000 for it's about 5 years. So that's pretty solid. And I mean, with only 320 to 350,000 deer, that's quite a few deer of your population though. And then in 2021, we had 53,000 harvested. This is where I noticed this, and because I was tracking this last few years. So 2020, we had 60,000. So at that point, it was still bouncing back. It was slowly going back up, looking good. And then 2021, it went to 53,000. 2022, it went to 47,000. That's when people were starting to complain a little bit. And then 2023, it was 39,000. And then this year, it said that we only dropped 2% more than that. So they're saying that we're starting to bounce back because we didn't have as significant of drop. Because, I mean, we went down, 30% from 2020. Because I remember we had like a 20% drop over a 2-year span, and then it dropped again. And so last year we had 39,000, almost 40,000 harvested. And then this year it was like 38,000 or something like that. So it's starting to level out a little bit. I'm hoping that's the case. It feels like the numbers reflect what the hunters are seeing personally, I think. I know our deer population is hurting because we're just not seeing near as many. And I don't know. The other thing I was going to say that I thought was interesting, Game and Parks they send out a survey every year after deer season. And not to everybody, but I think it said they sent it out to like 70,000 people. So I don't know. I think it's most of the people that do have tags, I think, personally. But I think I get it every year. So I fill it out every year because I'm like, at some point I'm sitting around bored and I'm like, oh, I can fill this out. So fill it out every year, and the questions are usually always pretty similar. It's usually always just, how many days did you hunt this year? How many deer do you feel like you saw? Where did you hunt? Was it private or public? So pretty much general questions. This year, though, was intriguing. I was expecting the same questions, just getting ready to fill it out. But then the questions they were asking this year was more like, when you hunt, do you hunt just for meat or do you hunt for trophy? I was like, well, that's an odd question. I don't remember ever seeing that one. And then the next question was, when you hunt, do you buy 1 or 2 tags? And then it asked, if you buy 2 tags, do you buy 2 tags right away? Or do you buy 1 and wait till you fill the next tag to buy another? And then another question after that was, if you didn't have the opportunity to hunt a buck, would you still hunt? And I was like, these are interesting questions, because it was starting to make me think, are they considering going to a 1 buck state, or are they considering not doing buck tags in certain units? Are they considering doing because another question was, would you hunt if you knew you didn't have a chance at a trophy buck? Or like if you knew you couldn't kill a trophy buck? And so then it made me think, are they going to go to like a 4-point minimum on one side? That was one thing I forgot to mention about Missouri. Certain counties in Missouri, you have to have a 4-point minimum on one side. They have a chart, like a map on there, and it shows, you can see it's not as many as you think. Like, I thought it was like maybe most of the state, but it's not even half the state. But they have a 4-point minimum, and they said the same thing. It's to help keep the age structure of the herd healthy. But so then I'm curious to know what Game and Parks is thinking for next year, because they already limited out of state tags the last couple of years, because it used to be unlimited out of state tags, like anybody could buy them over the counter. But enough people have been complaining and talking about how we're not seeing deer, population seems to be down. They finally instituted that, so now there's a quota on out of state tags, which I think is good. I personally think every state should have that. And they did say that they believe this year the reason that the numbers are starting to level out and bounce back is because of the quota on out-of-state tags, which is funny because that's what in-state Nebraska people have been complaining about for years, is that they give out too many tags to out-of-staters, and now it supposedly could be the reason that it's leveling out and fixing it. So that kind of made me laugh, because Nebraska people have been complaining about that for years, myself included. But I thought it was funny that was their reason, that they think this is the reason that things are getting back to where they should. But yeah, so it just made me curious to know what they're thinking about. I wish I would have gone to one of the big game meetings this year. I can watch it. It looks like still. I was trying to find one, the other day, and I couldn't find it, but they've got some on here, it looks like. So I might have to watch one of those, because I'm curious to see what they're going to say. Because I'd be curious to know, like, what would going to a 1 buck state do in Nebraska? I don't know. I think it'd be a good thing, personally. Or going to a 4-point minimum on one side. I don't know which would be better. That's the thing. I think either one would be good options, but I'd be curious, and they would obviously be able to probably tell from their data how many people kill 2 bucks every year. That's what I'd be interested to know. Because if it's a low number of people killing 2 bucks in Nebraska every year, then that's not going to make a difference. And I mean, like I said, majority of our harvest every year in Nebraska is firearm. So, and that's a whole nother thing to talk about, because the fact that we have our rifle season in the rut is just ridiculous, in my opinion. I shouldn't even go any further on that, because I'm sure every rifle hunter is going to be complaining about me complaining about it. But it's just a terrible time to do it. Personally, it's just you're going to lose way more deer that way. And I mean, I know obviously I want rifle hunters to be successful. I've been a rifle hunter, but they're just moving around so much, and it's just way easier to kill a deer with a rifle during the rut. With a bow, it's technically easier too because they are moving more, but it's also still really hard to kill a deer with a bow even during the rut. But with a rifle, way easier to kill a deer during the rut. So that's a whole nother thing. There's been a lot of people that have complained about that, saying we need to get out of the rut. I don't know if that's ever going to happen in Nebraska because we have a substantially higher amount of hunters that are just rifle hunters in Nebraska and not bow hunters. So they want to sell the tags, make money off of it. I get it. I personally think it shouldn't be in the rut, but that's not my call. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm curious. I need to watch this big game meeting because I'm curious to see what they say, because maybe I'm overthinking it, but it was just interesting. The questions on that survey that they were asking, I was like, this just are interesting, odd questions that I wasn't used to. That's kind of what spurred this whole thing on for me. But I don't know what would be better if you went to a 4-point minimum, if you were going to do one of those changes. I'm not saying they are. I mean, my guess is they won't. But if you really thought that we could make a difference in boosting our population by one of those, I would guess the 4-point minimum honestly might be a better option, because like I said, I don't think there's as many people killing 2 bucks in this state, but I just don't know. They would know the numbers more than me. I know the 1 buck rule thing in Indiana really worked. But in Nebraska, because we are such a firearm heavy state, that if you did the 1 buck rule, I still think most people are just going to kill the first buck they see. So I don't think that's going to make the biggest difference. I think a 4-point minimum, honestly, would probably make a bigger difference. But the other thing they got to do, if they're going to do any of that, and I still don't necessarily think they will, but if they are going to do any of that, they have to go back to check-in stations for firearm season. They still have check-in stations, but this was, I think, the first year that you could telecheck your deer, so you didn't have to go to a check-in station. Pretty easy to lie if you're doing a telecheck. So I think if they were going to institute some sort of rule like that, I think they would have to go back to, you have to go to a check station and check your deer in. And I don't know if they have any intentions of going back to that. But unfortunately, you have no idea how many deer we potentially lose to people just buying one tag and shooting multiple deer. I mean, I don't know. It could be different. I mean, there's poachers and there's just people that just don't care. It's just always been that way. But that's one thing they would have to do if they were going to institute a rule like that. Yeah, so that's about all I got for today. Let me know. I would like to know you guys' thoughts on that in Nebraska. If, like I said, I don't think they're going to do anything drastic, but I could be wrong. I'll watch this big game meeting and see what they say. But if there was something drastic in Nebraska, if they were thinking about that after that survey that I filled out, if they were thinking about if they were considering instituting a rule of a 1 buck rule or a 4-point minimum in Nebraska, what would your guys' opinion be? Would you like the 1 buck rule? Would you like the 4-point minimum? Or would you not like either at all? And that's fine. Like I said, I don't think they're going to do that, but I just don't know. But I would like to know from you guys, if they were doing one, no matter what, if they were no matter what going to put one of those rules in, which would you prefer? 1 buck only or 4-point minimum? I want to know your thoughts on which you'd prefer and which one do you think would be more productive on building the population back up, because everybody, like I said, feels like the population is down. That's a pretty unanimous thing for the most part, unless you have a really good prime property that you do a good job with. I'm sure you probably still have deer, but the general public believes the population is down over the last couple of years. So Let me know what you guys think on that. Throw me a comment. I would like to know. I just like to hear people's opinions. I think it's fun to chat about that stuff and see what's going through everybody else's mind. So, but I think that's all I got for today. Hopefully I didn't bore you guys too much. It'll be, I shot this actually a little bit later this week. There was some stuff going on, so I couldn't get it shot until today. Today's Thursday, so I'll put this out tomorrow on Friday and try and get somebody on next week. I still got a few people I'm trying to get on here that I've talked to, and just got to get some stuff scheduled and get stuff figured out. You know, everybody's got a busy life, but hopefully I have somebody on next week and we can talk to, so it's not just me boring you guys the whole time. But thanks for listening to Pins and Crosshairs, and we'll catch you next time.